Let us take our time now to learn about the CSS Box Model. This is a very essential part of this training because all the sizing you'll be doing and all the positioning you'll be doing in your CSS would depend on a solid understanding of this very concept. The CSS Box Model works on the assumption that everything and every element you find on your screen is a box. And so the element or the item itself takes this blue box and then it is surrounded by a padding followed by a border and then enclosed by a margin. Please take note of the order in which we go. The element is nested in within, and then the first box that surrounds the element is the padding, followed by the border, and then we move to the margin. So we are going to demonstrate how these elements or how these items affect the positioning of your elements on the page. And at the end, you would realize that this model plays a very important role in your understanding of CSS and its positioning of elements. So let's go. We are now in our VS Code. Let us create a new document. We are going to call this document CSS Box Model.html. Let's create that. We can close this colors and then begin with our image snippets. Okay, and then name this CSS Box Model. Let me close this, and then I would want us to add a style sheet. So box model.css, and then let's give it a body here to see that everything is working, and then give it a background color. I think I really like red. Let me go for blue today. I think red is my favorite color. And then in between the head tag, we write our link, and then automatically it's a style sheet. So box model.css. Let us inspect our page by opening our live server. Okay, so everything is working well. Let's push it to the right. Good. So that we dock it on our, and then we are going to close the file tree now. Control B closes it. So what we are going to do now is to describe an H2 with some text. Box model class. Okay, so that is working very well. Okay, so we can get rid of this, select everything and then get rid of it. We just wanted to test if everything is working well, and it looks like the linkage of our boxmodel.css is working very well. So we are seeing that this item is seen as a box by our browser. How do we get to know that? Let us right click and then inspect. Go to our Chrome developer tools. This is Edge, so that is Edge developer tools. And then when we come here, you can see that when we hover over this element, our H2 element, we can see that certain things are highlighted. So what is happening? The first blue box is actually the element itself, and then is it orange? The orange box is the margin we have around our elements. So in the previous slide, you were told that we move in a certain order, which is the element, and then the padding, border, and then margin. So this is what is happening. Let us select this element. Good. So we hover over it and then come this way. Let us look at the styles and then we'll come to computed later. So we can see that as soon as we open, we have elements.style, and then within the style nothing is showing. So let's us go and add something here so that we can. So within the style sheet, let us give it an H2. Let's give it a color, at least a color, so that we can illustrate something. Aqua. Let's see if that is going to be nice. Remember, okay, this isn't, it's not really appropriate. Let us change it to a different color. Let us give it somehow red, or this orange. Yes, quite okay. Yeah, this is quite okay. Accessibility, just as we learned in one of our lectures. So you can see that we can see this name here, boxmodel.css. I think if I widen it, okay, it's quite long, that is why. So you can see boxmodel.css, and we also see user agent style sheet. What at all is happening? So this is it. There are different forms of style sheets. The first one is the author style sheet, and that is what we are seeing here. The author style sheet is actually the style sheet that has been written by the developer himself. So if you are creating a website, the style sheet that you write is called the author style sheet. We can also see the user agent style sheet. And what is that? The user agent style sheet is the styling instruction that is written by the browser itself. You know that there are sometimes when you are coding, you may not specify certain properties and their values. And the browser has been written in a way that in certain situations, when you don't specify their properties and their values, the browser gives you a default property and its value, so that is going to serve as a fallback. Let us assume this. We are writing this code, we haven't specified any font family. So if the user opens the browser and then we have box model class as a text on the page, but then the browser says your programmer didn't specify any font family, and so I don't have any font family to display. How is the user going to feel? You see, you can't compromise on this, or you can't say that since the programmer didn't indicate any font family, the font should not display. So the browser has a fallback that is falling upon in cases where the programmer doesn't specify anything. And all these commands are written inside the user agent style sheet. And so an example is that in the Chrome browser, if you are on Windows and you don't specify the font family, Chrome is going to give you the Roboto font. That is automatic. And if you are on an Apple device, you would have the San Francisco font. And in the same way, if you are using Microsoft Edge, you are going to get the Sego UI, and then on Apple, you still have the San Francisco. And you know, even Edge doesn't work on Apple. So let us now come back to our box model. That was a piece of information that you are supposed to get. So what are we seeing here? The user agent style sheet already has some commands. So the display is block, and for that we understand because it is an H, it's a heading, and a heading is automatically displayed as a block level element. I think we've spoken about block level elements. And we have the font size as 1.5 rem, 1.5 em. And so it means that whatever styling would have will be from the font size here. And it is giving a margin block start of 0.83 em, and then a margin blocking. So the margin block start is a horizontal margin on the left, and then you know that the end would be a margin on the right, and then inline start is 0, and then the rest. And then let's look at this. Font weight has been given Unicode BD as isolate. So let us see. Let us hover over this. You see that as soon as we hover upon it, the blue side is highlighted. And when we hover over the padding, we realize that there is no padding that has been set. And so we are not seeing any padding at all. Let us go to the border. We are not seeing any border. But let's try with a margin and see something. You can see that some level of margin has been set already by our browser. It has set some amount of margin for us. And with a cascading order of our user agent, and then author CSS, and then the CSS that has been given by the user. The CSS that has been given by the user takes preference over all the other forms of CSS. So remember, there was a time we indicated the font size by going to settings and then going to looking for appearance, and then in the appearance we could select the font size that we want. And so whatever font size that we set could be overridden by what the user has set. And so that stands to reason that the user selected or the user initiated styles have a higher precedence, or they are more preferred compared to the ones that the programmer has set and followed by the one that the browser has set. So the programmer can easily set up styles that can override whatever the browser is issuing. Now, let us see what the margins and the borders and the paddings do. So with that, we'll be going back to our file, and then let us dock this on the right nicely. No, this isn't docking properly. Yeah, I think it's very okay now. So we can see that, let's go to computed and then push this down. No, that's not working. Let's see. Good. So we can see that the element itself is with the blue. That is what is in blue. So let us set some width to it. Let's give it a width of, let's say, 50 pixels and see what is going to happen. I think 50 pixels is just so small, but you can see that as soon as we set the 50 pixels, you can see there is 50 within. That is quite small, and when we hover, right now it is no more displaying as a block level element, but spanning just the size of the width we set. I think 50 is just too small. Let's go with something like 200. Yeah, 200 would allow it some amount of breathing space. And then the padding. Padding is basically the breathing space within the element. So let's give it a padding of, let's say, padding of about 50 pixels, and let's see how it's going to look. Good. So we can see this is the element itself. As soon as we give it a padding, you can see that the padding is now working. So when we hover over the padding, you can see that green area that is selected. If we take it off and we hover, let us comment it out, control and then the /, you see you don't see any green highlight. So the padding gives your words or your elements some level of breathing space. And then let us look at the border. So the border is basically a line that is around your elements. So let us give it a border. Let's say border has width. Yeah, let's go with a more conventional way. 2 pixels. Let's see if that is going to work. And then we specify border type. I'm so sorry, my keyboard is just too sensitive. So the border style, let's go with, okay, dashed is not bad. Let's go with the dashed border. So you can see that the border is working now, and we can also give it a color. So it looks like our border has inherited from our H2's color, but we can specify a color as well. So border color, we can go for black so that we change our border into black. So border is basically a line that is around our text or around our elements. We can increase the size of that line so that it becomes more or less of a box. So let's try, let's try 20. Yes, and we can change the type of the border into solid. So the border could be solid. So you can see a solid border that is around our element. And then you can change the width and then change the border color. There are more border types we can put as well. So we can go for double. Let us check double so you can see what double is doing. We can also go for, I think we've done dashed but not dotted. So this is a dotted border. And then we can also go for a solid border. So this is a solid border again. And so that is how borders work. So the element itself is here. Within, we hover it and see. And then followed by the padding. That gives it some level of breathing space. And then we go to the border. And then from the border, we now move to what we call the margin. So margin is used to indicate, or it's used to describe the space you want the item to be from the adjacent item. So how far should the elements be from the next item or from the beginning of the page? That is what the margin does. So let's give it a margin. Let's begin with margin left. Let's give it a margin left of, let's say, 20 pixels. You can see it moves. It moves. Let's give it a high margin from the top. So margin top, let's give it a margin top of about 200 so that we can see the effects very well. So you can see that our browser is being told that move the box 200 pixels away from the top. Let's give it, and we can also give margins as negative values. So let's give it negative 20 from the left and see. You can see that it is now entering the page. Let's give it something that is more evident. Let's give it like minus 50. And you can see that now our box is entering. Let's go with about minus 200 and see what is going to happen. So that is to paint the picture that margins can be negative, and whatever value we put, you can inspect that on your right. So the element is 200 pixels in width. That is only the width of the elements. Let me come back here. Let me comment out the margin so this 200 that we specified is just for the width of the element within but does not take into account the padding, the border. These are calculated differently, and we'll look at how we can incorporate the calculations of the paddings, the borders, and the rest in the calculation of the width itself. There is also one property called the outline, and the outline is basically a line that is drawn after the margin. And so for the outline, we normally do not include that in the calculation of the width. So if after drawing your border, you would want an outline, it is after the margin. And so let us try that so that you can look at the outline in real time. So you can give it an outline, let's say 1 pixel, a solid outline, and then let's give it a color of, I think it has even inherited already. 1 pixel is just so small, so let's go for about 6 pixels, and you can see that there has been a red outline that is after the whole item or the whole thing. Let's see, we can also offset the outline. So outline offset, no, outline offset of about 200 pixels. That is going to be too much, so let's give it about 10 pixels. So the offset basically tells us how far away from our box should we set our outline. We can also have some negative values here as well. So if we set some, let's set about negative 30, no, not 13, but rather 30. So you can see that when you set the negative values, it pushes the outline inside. Now it's now inside the element itself. So that is a very cool thing you can practice. And I think we use the shortcuts here, but we haven't got to shortcuts yet. So the outline, just as we have borders, so outline, we have the outline width. Let's go with the outline width. We specified about 6 pixels, so let's go to 6 pixels for outline, and then outline style, that could also be dotted. Let's go for something like double, so you can see it is working really cool. We can also give it a color just as we did. So outline color, we can go for red, just as that's my favorite. So it's looking red, but I'm not even seeing the difference between the red and the orange that we set, but we assume it's still red. That is very fine. So that is that for outline. Now we have a way we can specify the items in shortcuts. So the properties can be given in shortcuts. So let's begin with border. I think we've done this before, but this is when we do it officially. So I've commented out these codes, but they are not working. Let me comment them out properly so that you can easily follow. Okay, so everything commented out nicely. Let's begin with some border. And then right now we are going to specify our units in EMs and REMs so that you get a solid understanding of that too. So please keep an eye here as well. I would want you to keep an eye in this box as well. So border, we can specify that as a shortcut. So the first thing is the border width. So we specify that as 2 pixels. And then the border type goes. So the border type could be solid. As soon as we specify, we can see that the border is working now. And then we can specify the color as green, or an RGB color, anyhow you would want to go. And that is how we specify borders in our shortcuts. Now we can also do same for padding. I'm sorry for this thing. We can also do same for our outline. I'm sorry, forgive me. For our outline, just as we saw. So the outline could also have an outline of 20 pixels. We can have an outline of 20 pixels that is dashed. And you can see it's working. That is too much. Let's go for REM values, just as I promised. So 1.5 EM. That is way too big. So let's go with something like 1 or 0.25 EM. And you know that this is based on our font size. So let us specify a font size of about 1 REM, which is about 16 pixels, right? You remember that. So our font size is 1 REM, which is about 16 pixels. And then we are multiplying our 16 pixels by 0.25. That is about a quarter of 16 pixels, and that is going to give us about 4 pixels. Let us change this into 4 pixels and see if our calculations are right. Let's see if there's going to be a change. So there was no change. It means values are right. And we can specify the outline as about 0.3, not pixels, but rather 0.3 EM. So that is 0.3 looks quite small. Let us add the type solid. And it's working just fine. I feel 0.6, okay, 0.3 is quite okay. And then let's give it some level of offset. So for that we specify outline offset. Okay, it's not, yeah, let us add offset. Good, it's now working. Let's give it about 20 pixels, or that's quite okay with us. So that is how we indicate our box items or box properties. So we have been able to show that everything inside our HTML is indeed a box. And so whatever you are working with, you should know how you are going to position it with your padding, your border, and then your margin as well. We can see that as soon as we open this, let us clear everything. Let us clear everything now. Good. We can see that as soon as we open our browser, we get some amount of spacing. We can see that there's some level of margin around our text, and that may not be what we want, because already, let's go to computed. Okay, I think that is what is open. Let me expand this. Good. So we can see that as soon as we open, we can see some margin, and then some margins have been added already. But what if we don't want that? We want to take control over our margins, and if you have these margins already set by the user agent style sheet, it means that you don't have access to the very first pixel on your screen, that is 0.00, or top, bottom, the top left corner. You don't have access to the top left corner of your page, because already there has been some level of margins that have been indicated. So what if we don't want it? To change it, we use our wildcard select elements. That is, we select all the elements using the star selector, and then please keep an eye here to see if things will change. So already we have about 19 pixels of margin provided, and then our item also has its own amount of width. So the first thing is we indicate that we don't want any padding. So padding 0. Okay, so padding is 0. Let us inspect. This thing is too large, so let's go this way. Yeah. So padding is 0. And then let's see, the magic is going to happen if we change the margin. So margin also 0. Let me go back. Yeah, I want you to experience that magic. So the margin here is 0 as well. Let's change the margin to 0. So you can see that as soon as we change the margin to 0, all the margins we had now have turned into 0. So padding left, padding bottom, everything is 0. And so right now our element has access to the top left corner of the page. It is rendering basically at the top there. And then margins have been set to dash now. So the only thing that has been set is the width of our item. And then there is also one thing that we usually set when we are dealing with the CSS reset. So what we are doing is a CSS reset. We are setting all the paddings and then margins to our preferred values. So in CSS reset, we usually set the box sizing to border box. And what is happening here? There are basically two values we have in box sizing, and the default value is content box. So what is happening? Let us set a width here. Let's give it a width of about 100 pixels. Yeah. So width of 100 pixels is quite small. Let us give it about 300. I think 300 will be okay, or 330 is fine. Let's see. Okay, so 330 is fine. You see that when we give it a width, let's give it a padding of about 20 pixels, and then margin also of about 30 pixels. So you can see from here that when we specify the width of about 330, the width only applies to the element in the H2 tag, the element itself. It doesn't take into consideration the paddings we are adding. It doesn't take into consideration the margin we are adding. And so the whole item or the whole element is actually taking 30 plus 20 plus 330 plus 20 plus 30 as the whole width. That is the size of the item. That's the size of the H2 item we have described here. So it tells us that this element is going to be just too long. So when we highlight, you can see that it is more than the 330 that we specified. And that is what content box does. It tells the browser that whatever width we are indicating only goes to the content. Please calculate the margin and the padding differently. But what if we change this one into border box? So let us change this into border box. So as soon as we change it into border box, you can see that the size has reduced now. So we have set a left margin of 30, a right padding of 20, and then a right, that was a left, sorry, a right padding of 20, a right margin of 30. So you can see that here the element itself is spanning just 290 pixels of width, and then the rest to make up for the paddings and then the margin set, we have to limit it to 290. So we have 290, and then the about 40 pixels remaining would be used for the paddings that we have set. You know that this is border box. It is border box that we specified. So we calculate everything up to the border and not the margin. So margins are actually outside. So that is why the width is 290. So 290 plus the 20 plus the 20 would is supposed to give us a 330 nicely. So what the border box is telling our browser is that whatever size we are specifying, please, it is up to the border. So whatever padding we add, please add the padding into the computation of the width we have specified, and that really helps us. So these are two ways in which you can specify your width and your height. So it's not only about width, the height is also included. So all your widths and your heights, you can either choose to calculate the paddings in addition to your widths and heights specified, or you can exclude them. It depends on the conversion you would want to use. Initially, that was the only, it was content box, that was the only option you had in CSS2, but CSS3 has brought this new game changer, and it's very great to practice with it. In the margin that we specified, this margin was for all the margins across. So top margin, right margin, bottom margin, and then left margin. But if we want to specify them separately, how do we do it? So when you specify just one value, it means that it applies to all of them. So you can see that when we specified margin 30, we can see top here 30, right 30, bottom 30, and then left 30. What if we specify 30 pixels and 20 pixels? What is going to happen? So you can see that when you specify two values, you would have it for top bottom, that will be the same as the first value, which is 30, and then the left right would also be the second value. So the margin for the y-axis comes first, and then the margin for the x-axis comes second. And then what if we add another value? So if we add another value, so specifying for 3 different values, then the first one would be for margin top, the next one will be for margin right and left, and then the last one will be for margin bottom. So you should take note of that. And then what if we add another? So you can see the vibe now. If we add another, it is going to go the clockwise direction. So margin top 30, margin right 20, margin bottom 10, and then margin left as 5. The same thing applies to padding as well. So we can have shortcuts for padding. So you can see what is happening. Padding top down 20, left right 4. So you can go on to experiment with your paddings and then margin values with the shortcuts that you have learned in this course. There is also a way that you can specify, or you can make your margins automatic. So if you specify a top-down margin, let's say this margin is going to be 1.5 EM. That is for top-down. If you give it a margin auto, it is going to center your element within the parent item. So we have specified this, and then we give it a margin auto. So you can see that it is being centered. So the margin left is 93, margin right is 93 as well. So it's being centered within whatever element we have, or within its parent. So that is a nice way we can center our elements as well. This has some level of paddings and width. That is why we are not seeing it being centered properly. But if we specify the width very well, we can use that to center our elements within their parent. So if you give a top-down margin and then you give the left-right margin as auto, you can use that to center your elements within their parents. And we are going to look at more of them in the remaining areas of our studies.